Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakio. Thank you for joining me for this evening's Dharma Sunday, where we take canonical Buddhist teachings and tie them with everyday life. The title of today's talk is Kirk Franklin Cusses Out His Son. Before we get into that, I'll remind you to like this video and subscribe. That way you'll be notified when I do live streams in the future. These teachings are offered free of charge, but if you'd like to make a contribution, information for that, PayPal and CashApp is in the description. If you want to do a deep dive into Buddhist training, check out my book, Perfectly Ordinary Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. A link to a free sample chapter of the book is also in the description for this talk. So, I grew up on Kirk Franklin's music. I was raised, as I've said before, as an evangelical Christian kid in the Black Pentecostal church. And Kirk Franklin, C.C. Winans, Bishop T.D. Jakes, they were always playing in the car. In fact, to this day, I can still remember some of the lyrics. Kirk Franklin, one of his first big hits was a song called Stomp. And the hook was he would sing, "GP, are you with me?" GP being his group, God's Property, and they would respond, "Oh yeah, we have in church, ain't going nowhere." And we would love that song. It actually got too popular, in fact. It was being played not only in the church, but also in barbershops and nightclubs, and the more traditional Christians didn't like that because that's not where God's music belonged in their view. But you know, Kirk Franklin has done very well for himself. I have a lot of respect for him. He's clearly very successful, very popular. So I don't know him personally, but there is a connection there. He was a big part of my childhood growing up. And I still hear his music to this day when I visit relatives. And the reason I'm talking about him today is there's a video circulating of a conversation he had with I believe his eldest son, who he's estranged from. And I don't know exactly what happened there, but long story short, they had an argument. The son recorded the argument, posted it to social media, and people have been responding. So to give you some background, I'm going to read two articles commenting on this discussion. The first comes from thesource.com, and they had this to say. According to a recent social media post, gospel singer Kirk Franklin's 33-year-old son was threatened by his father that he would put his foot in his expletive for disrespecting him. From the beginning, the elder Franklin can be heard calling his estranged son a expletive, and towards the end told his son, "I will break your neck," expletive. His son has come out in the news before about Franklin's alleged vengeful ways, claiming that his father tried to kill him. So that's one posting about the argument. And you can go on social media if you want to hear the recording for yourself. I won't play it as part of this talk. But I do also want to read a response that I thought was interesting. This one is from, I believe, a radio station, V101.9 WBAV. The author is Janine. The title is Gospel Singer Kirk Franklin Should Have Cussed Out His Son and Not Apologize. And it says, "This isn't the side of Kirk Franklin most people are used to hearing, but it seems Franklin's 33-year-old son thought he would expose, in quotation marks, his dad. Franklin has since apologized, saying he's not perfect. But personally, I'm not mad at Franklin. Any child who says F you to a parent is supposed to get cussed out. It's a parental right and a must. In fact, I'd be mad at Franklin if he didn't have some choice words for his son, and he, the son, should get an extra helping of cussing, in quotation marks, because he recorded the conversation of his daddy going off without him knowing. Now that's a busta," and then 2 exclamation marks. So That's what happened, and that was the feedback. And I want to make something very clear before I go into my talk. This is not a Buddhism good, Christianity bad discussion. A 2-second Google search will show that Buddhist teachers, Buddhist students have done things in the context of the Sangha that are much worse than what Kirk Franklin did to his son. So that's not what we're doing today. But as I've often said during these talks, I do feel that we can find Dharma teachings everywhere and in everything. That's the point of Dharma Sunday. We're told in the sutras that everyone and everything, people, plants, animals, are part of the Buddha body, the Dharmakaya, in the same way that our cells are part of our human body. Thus, everything is a Buddha that can teach us the Dharma. They can teach us what to do. They can teach us what not to do. So my goal isn't to say anything negative about Kirk, about his family. I'm chanting enlightened incense for them. I encourage you to do the same. He's a human being. Human beings make mistakes. He has put out a video apologizing for his actions, saying that the part that wasn't in the recording was him calling the family therapist to try to get a mediator between him and his son. I'm sure that there's a lot of things that led up to that discussion. So I want to make that 100% clear. This is not me bashing Kirk Franklin. This is not me bashing Christianity. This happened. It's in the news. What can we as Buddhists learn from this? Because I do want to encourage you to have that lens of looking at the news, looking at everything of what Buddhist teaching can I take from this. So this being a teaching moment, I think the first thing we can learn about this is suffering, and more specifically, the causes of suffering. So we all know, or maybe we don't know, I'll recite them here, the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. The way to end suffering is to end desire. The way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, imagine that teaching as being up here, and down here being the source of the 4 noble truths. We have the 12-link chain of dependent origination. And that's described in the Rice Seedling Sutra by Buddha. I'll read a passage from that sutra here. The translation comes from Venerable Tenzin Gachi. And it says in the Rice Seedling Sutra, Venerable Bhikkhus, whoever sees dependent and relative origination sees the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. What is this dependent and relative origination of which I speak? It is this. Because this exists, that arises. Because this is born, that is born. It is like this. Through the condition of ignorance, compounding factors. From the condition of compounding factors, consciousness, name and form, the 6 sense spheres, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, existence, birth, aging, and death. From the condition of aging and death, agony, wailing, suffering, unhappiness, and mental disturbance all arise. Like that, merely this enormous heap of suffering arises. So this is a lot of words. What does it mean? Well, the first thing we have to understand, both about the 4 noble truths and also about the 12-link chain of dependent origination, is that it's not linear. It's cyclical. Okay? So it starts with ignorance. We go through the chain, ends in death, and then it starts again with ignorance. This is reincarnation. This is why you, me, the Buddha, all of us have lived countless lives, because we are trapped in this cycle of dependent origination. Ignorance, boom, 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 death, ignorance, boom, 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 death, ignorance. This is the cycle of samsara, the cycle of suffering, the cycle of reincarnation. So this is happening in our lifetimes, but it's also happening in every moment. Ignorance, boom, 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 death, ignorance, boom, 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 death happens in every second, every minute, every day, and finally at the end of our lives. But the question then becomes, what are we ignorant of? Well, in the absolute sense, we are ignorant of our true nature, which is our Buddha nature. This is why I say that we're enlightened beings, because we're Buddhas, but we're ignorant of that fact. We are enlightened, but we don't behave like enlightened beings. And that's the point of our training. It isn't to help us attain something new, it's to bring us back into alignment with the enlightenment, with the Buddha nature that we already possess. This is why we are Buddhas that also have to practice Buddhism. This is why I also have said at times that reincarnation is not a punishment. This is a little bit off topic, but non sequitur. Reincarnation is just something we have to go through. Living countless lives is how we recognize our Buddha nature, because it takes multiple lives. Buddha, Kannan, Amida, all lived countless lives. And then they finally, over time, through practice, realized their enlightened nature. Amida was Dharmakara, a monk, a human monk, and through his practice over countless kalpas, became Amida, the Buddha of infinite light, created a pure land. Kannan, in some teachings, she was a nun, in others, she was a princess. Either way, lived countless lives before she became Kannan, the Bodhisattva of compassion. The Buddha, if we read the sutras, lived countless lives. He was in the heaven realms, he was in the hell realms. And over those lifetimes, he realized enlightenment and then became Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, who helped us realize our own enlightenment. If we touch a hot stove, is it punishment if we get burned? No, that's just the nature of our actions, right? So we're not punished by our karma. We just suffer the consequences of that karma. Kirk Franklin and his son right now are not being punished by anyone, but they are suffering the consequences of the karma of their actions. So that's my little 5-minute spiel on reincarnation. But going back to the topic at hand, it's the ignorance of our Buddha nature that causes suffering. That's why in the Nirvana Sutra, Buddha says, he uses the analogy of a man who's drunk. He's so drunk, in fact, that he doesn't recognize his own mother and his own sister, and he mistreats them. Why? Because he thinks they're strangers and they're trying to cause him harm. He's so drunk on alcohol in this case, he doesn't realize what's happening. We, as human beings, are also drunk, not necessarily on alcohol. We're drunk on clinging. We're drunk on desire. We're drunk on our craving. And because we're drunk on craving, on desire, on clinging, we don't see the consequences of our actions. We don't recognize our mother. We don't recognize our sister. In that conversation, Kirk and his son said horrible things to each other. They were both wrong. But they were so drunk, in this case on anger, that they didn't recognize each other. His son did not think he was speaking to his father. His father didn't think he was speaking to his son. They thought they were speaking to an enemy because they were drunk on anger. And because of that, this is what happened. Ignorance of our Buddha nature, ignorance of the Buddha nature of others, that's what causes suffering. So we can simplify the 12-link chain of dependent origination into 4 parts. This is all you really need to remember, unless you want scholarly pursuits and you want to memorize them. Just memorize these 4 things. Ignorance of our Buddha nature leads to craving. Craving leads to clinging. Clinging being another word for desire. Desire leads to the 3 poisons: greed, anger, ignorance. Ignorance, in this case, we have absolute ignorance, which starts the chain of suffering. We also have ignorance of the conventional world as well. Ignorance of the consequences of our actions. Ignorance of the fact that if I say F you to my father, he's going to threaten me with physical violence. Ignorance of the fact that if I threaten my son with physical violence, he's probably going to do something like posting an argument on social media to cause me harm, to hurt my legacy. Ignorance of our Buddha nature leads to craving. We want things. Craving leads to clinging, desire. Desire leads to greed, anger, and ignorance. Every source of suffering we have can be tracked to those three poisons, which can themselves be tracked to ignorance of our own Buddha nature, which is why we spend so much time studying our desires in Buddhism, studying our greed, studying our anger, studying our ignorance, so we can learn to work with them skillfully. What desires cause harm to the point where I need to get rid of them completely? Renunciation. What desires cause harm, but I can't get rid of them, so I need to work with them skillfully? That's upaya, or skillful means. And what desires do I have that I can't get rid of, and there really isn't a skillful way to work with them? Birth, aging, sickness, death. So I just have to practice acceptance. That's the practice. That's Buddhism. We don't recognize each other because we're drunk. And because we're drunk, we act badly. Buddhism helps us break this cycle. And it's so simple to talk about, but it's so difficult to do because our desires are intoxicating. We don't get caught up in greed, anger, and ignorance because they make us feel bad. Long term, they do. But in the short term, it feels good. I remember before I started practicing Buddhism, I was a very angry person. And I felt good when I was angry, when I was having a temper tantrum, when I was spouting off at the mouth at people. It felt good. I felt powerful. I felt strong. I'm going to call you this, and I'm going to say this to you, and I'm going to threaten you, and you're not going to do anything about it. It feels good in the moment. We're drunk. Getting drunk feels good until you have the hangover. Greed, anger, and ignorance feel good until you have the hangover, until you have the karmic consequences of your actions. The Noble Eightfold Path helps us break that cycle. And it's very interesting to me. It's really incredible how smart Buddha was, and how smart all the people who came after him were, because they pieced this Buddhism thing together so well that it just fits together like a puzzle, right? So we have the Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. So that's ignorance. Life is suffering. We don't understand the nature of reality. We don't realize that suffering is a natural part of life. That leads to desire, craving, the way, and clinging. We clump those together in the Four Noble Truths. The way to end desire the way to end suffering is to end desire. The way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. What is the Noble Eightfold Path other than a way to rid ourselves of greed, anger, and ignorance? He's starting at the end result, and he's working his way backwards until we finally realize who we are as Buddhists. We look at the Noble Eightfold Path. What do we have? We have right view and right intention. We see the world clearly. We understand the source of our suffering, and we want to do something about it. That's right view and right intention. And then what's really cool is that the first thing he tells us to do is not to meditate. It's not to go on retreat. It's to practice right speech. Right view, right intention, right speech. Our words are powerful. So powerful. And they allow us, if we use them skillfully, to break the cycle of suffering, to break the cycle of samsara, the cycle of reincarnation, if we use our words skillfully. Kirk Franklin, unfortunately, in that moment, because he's a human being, and I've been there too, drunk on anger, did not use his words skillfully. His son, again, drunk on anger, again, I've been there. I know family can push our buttons, did not use his words skillfully. So instead of breaking the cycle of suffering between father and son, they started again. Ignorance. And who knows, maybe they have another conversation. They start again. Boom. Cycle. Ignorance. This is why I always say desire is a natural part of life. Suffering is a natural part of life. Desire, greed, anger, ignorance leads to suffering. The suffering leads to more greed, anger, and ignorance. We have to learn to break that cycle. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to practice right speech. Say nice things to people. Congratulate them on their successes. Thank them for doing a good job. Thank them for doing any job. Hey, I appreciate that you tried. Right speech is so important. And when we talk about cycles of suffering, it's not just in our own lives, it's also in the lives of other people as well. And this is what I really wanted to get at, is that we are going to suffer as human beings. Period, end of discussion. The First Noble Truth tells us that. But we have a choice on whether we continue that cycle or whether we break that cycle. I was at a restaurant the other day, and this is actually a restaurant I've been to several times in the past. They know me. They may not have recognized me in that moment because I was wearing a mask, but I received pretty terrible service going in. So I'm staying in line, and they walked right past me and tried to wait on another person instead of me. That person was kind and compassionate. They said, "Oh, actually, I think that gentleman was here first." The hostess looks at me. "Oh, I'm sorry, have you not been served?" I said, "No." And then she replies by turning to the other person and apologizing to him for the wait. Completely bypassed me. And again, this is a restaurant I've been to before. It wasn't until I sat down at the table and I took my mask off, and then she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." Well, you shouldn't need to recognize me. I'm the customer. You should treat me well. I'm spending money in your restaurant. Now, in that moment, I had a choice to make. I'm suffering right now. I'm hungry. I want my food. You ignored me. I waited longer than I was supposed to. And then you didn't apologize. I'm suffering. And I was angry because I'm a human being. But, and this isn't me, this is Buddha and his teachings helping me in my life. I understood I had a choice in that moment. Do I continue the cycle of suffering, or do I break it? Do I say mean things to her? Do I demand to speak to a manager? Do I write a bad Yelp review? Do I continue the cycle of suffering, or do I break it? So I broke the cycle of suffering. I ate my meal without complaint. I left a 20% tip, even though the service was terrible. Now, am I going to go back to that restaurant? No. No, I'm not going to. But the last interaction that we had, I know that I chose to not let my anger take control. I detoxed myself from it. I sobered up just a little bit. And again, this is not something I did. I'm not special in any way. If this had happened 10 years ago, it would have been a totally different thing. It was thanks to the Buddha and thanks to his teaching that I was able to act responsibly in that manner. This is why I'm so grateful and thankful to him and to the patriarchs and matriarchs that have kept these teachings going. But that's the choice we have to make. In every conversation, this is said to me. What do I say back? It's a cycle, the cycle of suffering. Someone says a mean word to me. Do I say a mean word back, or do I give them a compliment? What do? I had a coworker many years ago. This was very early in my Buddhist training. We were both managers in a call center, and for whatever reason, this guy just didn't like me. I don't know why. We didn't get along. Whatever I said, let's go left, he wanted to go right. So he's constantly undermining my decisions. And because it was early in my training and I didn't really know what I was doing as a Buddhist, for a while I fed into that. And you will not be surprised to know that that made the situation worse. If someone says something mean to you and you say something mean back, they usually respond by saying something mean back to you. So I spoke to my teacher and he said, try giving him a compliment. See what happens. I didn't want to give the guy a compliment. I didn't like him. He was making my job more difficult. He was disrespecting me. But I had a lot of respect for my teacher. So I did that. I gave him a compliment. I actually wrote him out a card And it was painful to do so, but I wrote out a card saying, hey, I appreciate your work in the call center. I know you're working hard. We've had some difficulties. I hope we can move past it. And I gave it to him. And he came up to me afterwards and said, hey, thank you. I appreciate that. Later on, we had a discussion and I said, look, I don't always like the way you speak to me. I don't always like the way you respond in meetings, but I promise for my part, from now on, if I want to do something, I'll run it by you first. And if I have a disagreement, I will do it in the conference room when it's just us, not out in front of the people that we manage, because that's how much I respect you. Now, I was livid as I was saying this. Again, this isn't me. This is the Buddha and me following his instructions. This is why I say we have to have faith in the path. And lo and behold, he said, okay, I'll do the same. Now, we weren't the best of friends after that, but we were able to maintain a good relationship. The Dharma helped me break the cycle of suffering, the 12-link chain of dependent origination, the Four Noble Truths. But it starts with right speech, after right view and right intention. Right speech, right action, right livelihood are so important, so powerful. I know when I was a child, we don't really have this phrase in Buddhism, but in Christianity, what they used to always talk about was generational curses. Curses passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, etc. And what I think those curses are just karma. One person receives suffering, and then they have a choice. Do I want to pass this on to the people who come after me? I'm sure that Kirk Franklin's father probably said some pretty mean and nasty things to him. I'm sure it happened. And reading through the comments of people who think he did the right thing, they probably had some terrible things said to them by parents when they were kids. It happens. But then we choose how we want to talk to our children. Do we want to pass that curse of violent speech on, that curse of anger on to the next generation, or do we want to stop it? This happened to me, but I'm not going to do it to you. I'm suffering, but I'm not going to cause you to suffer as a response. It reminds me of when I was a kid. We used to have this thing where, let's say we're playing tag and someone pushes the other kid too hard and he falls on the ground and gets hurt. So in that case, what would happen is the kid who got hurt would get up and he'd punch the other kid in the chest, and then you'd be even, right? You hurt me, I hurt you, we're done. We're even. But it never works out that way. At least not at my school, it never did. It was always one kid punched the other kid, and then you punched me too hard. So then they punch him back. You punched me too hard. So then they punch them back, and now it's a fight. Right? But we're children, so we do stuff like that. But what if now, as grown-ups, I assume if you're watching this that we're all grown-ups. Sorry if you're not. But what if instead of trying to get even with people, we try to break the cycle of suffering instead? Not saying we allow ourselves to be hurt. As I talked about during meditation sutra study previously, Bodhisattva Sarvabhaumabhuta didn't just sit around and let people beat him up. He would put some distance between him and them. But then he said, I will not disparage you. If you continue walking in the path, and you will be a Buddha someday. And then later on, he's reincarnated as the Buddha, and the people who used to beat him up are reincarnated as members of his Sangha, because he broke the cycle of suffering. And that's the lesson I think we can take from Kirk Franklin and his son. Again, I'm chanting for them and lighting sutras. Not lighting sutras on fire, I promise. Lighting incense on their behalf. I encourage you to do the same. But that's the lesson we can take. We see what happens when you continue the cycle of suffering within your family, with your coworkers, with your friends. What happens if we break that cycle? What if we sober up from the greed, from the anger, from the ignorance, and act instead from wisdom and compassion as embodied by Kannan and Manju, also known as Manjushri, the bodhisattvas of compassion and wisdom. I think it's telling that if you look at a traditional Buddhist altar, if you look at my altar, you see the Buddha, and on the left you have Monju, wisdom, and on the right you have Kannan, compassion, because they are the actualization of Buddha. So when we talk about the actualization of our enlightenment, we are talking about the practices of wisdom and compassion, of Manju and Kannan. So if we act with wisdom, if we act with compassion, we are acting like Buddha. We are actualizing our own enlightenment, breaking the cycle of suffering, no longer ignorant of our own true nature. We are being Buddhas and behaving like Buddhas. Again, this is the genius of this path. It all fits together. It's like a puzzle. And it's incredible to study it and learn about it. So that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. Amitabha. And now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this evening's chat. So if you have questions, comments about the talk, about what happened between Kirk Franklin and his son, about instances when you've either continued the cycle of suffering, because we're humans and we do that, or if you've broken the cycle of suffering in your own life, I'd love to hear about that. Or if you just have general comments you'd like to share, type them in the chat and I'll be sure to respond. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I will make some announcements. So if this is your first time joining us, this is Dharma Sunday. We do it every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. It consists of a Dharma talk, usually about some current event that's happening, followed by a Q&A, which we'll do shortly. On Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, we do meditation and sutra study, where that consists of a 15-minute guided meditation, followed by a reading from a sutra. Right now, we're doing the Lotus Sutra. I think we have about 2 more weeks of that. Then we'll move on to the Awakening of Faith Sutra. Then we do a Dharma talk and a Q&A. If you'd like to take part in the live streams, please be sure to like this video. It helps the channel. I appreciate it. And then also subscribe and hit the notification button so you're notified when I go live. These teachings are offered free of charge, but if you'd like to make a contribution, information for that is in the description. Oh, wow. There's a lot of chatter coming in today, which is great. I love speaking with you guys. I learned so much. So Divad Buddha X did the bow emoji. Thank you, Divad. So wonderful to have you here. Allison Griffin did the clap emoji, the bow emoji, and then the green heart emoji. And Allison, I am always interested to see what color heart you will use. So it's interesting you went with green today. That's actually, green and blue are my favorite colors. So thank you so much for that. Michelle Foster did the bow emoji. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us this evening. It's good to have you. Frank Ingiosi also bowed. Thank you, Frank. Lovely to have you here. Divad Buddha X said, people are like garbage trucks where they walk around with trash inside of them, anger, regrets, etc. And that trash piles up. They get full and dump it on the nearest person, something I learned recently. Another great analogy, Divad, and so true. It's so true. We gather up all this crap and then we just dump it on people because we can't take it anymore. And then they dump it on someone else and it continues the cycle of suffering. And what's great about our practice is, one, we understand where all this garbage comes from, but then we also learn healthy ways to deal with it. So it's never about, I will never be angry again. I will never be greedy again. I will never be ignorant of the causes of suffering again. It's, I'm greedy, I'm angry, I'm ignorant. What's a good way to cope with this? I'm angry. Well, I can get a bottle of Jack, or I can go meditate for a while. Maybe talk to my teacher. I'm angry at the person I'm speaking with right now. Well, I can react with hateful speech, or I can walk away, take a break, let my anger subside, and then come back to the conversation later. We all have garbage. I like that you use garbage trucks, because I don't care who you are going to create garbage, right? But do you take that garbage and dump it in your front yard, or do you put it in the trash can, take it out to the curb so the garbage man can take it away? In Buddhism, Buddha is our garbage man. We chant Nambutsu, we meditate, we read the sutras, we do prostrations, and he takes our garbage away from us. Wonderful. You also said, Divad Buddha X, anger is throwing dirt against the wind only to have the wind blow it back at you. Yes, also a good analogy. Very true. Very true. I'm reminded of a quote from Visuddhimagga, where it said, anger is like grabbing a hot coal or excrement, hoping to throw it at another person. You burn your hand or you cover yourself in excrement. And I'm paraphrasing, that's not the exact quote, but that's the general gist of it, is that, you can pick up a hot coal and throw it at someone. That's one way to respond, but you're going to hurt yourself if you do that. You can pick up some crap, dog crap, let's say, and throw it at someone. That's one way to respond, but your hand's going to stink afterwards. Maybe we should do something else. And the monk who came up with that quote was named Buddha Gosa, by the way, in case anyone wants to read up more on that. But yeah, very good. Diva Buddha X also said, you're full of energy today, LOL. Yeah, I am. And there's a reason for that. So you'll notice the background is different than it has been in previous talks. There's no fire alarms or sirens in the background. And I appreciate the fact that you guys practice with me through all of that. But I have an announcement that's coming up that's related to why this background is different, why I'm full of energy. So that's forthcoming. I have to figure out the way I want to announce it. But yeah, I am full of energy. Thank you. I hope that energy helped the talk be better and not worse. Let's see. Allison Griffin said, breaking the chain of reactivity is hard the first time, hard the second time, hard the third time, until eventually it isn't quite so hard, and then it's liberating, but while it takes strength. That is 100% true. That's why meditation, seated meditation, is such a powerful practice. And that's the reason we practice meditation, is we're breaking that chain of reactivity. Because we're sitting back straight, we're breathing in and out. We do this every Wednesday, and we want to check our phone. We want to go on a website and check our social media. We're hungry and we want to go grab a bite to eat. We have all these reactivity thoughts, and what do? We ignore them. Not forever. We get some food, we check our social media, we scratch our nose eventually if it itches. But for the time being, during meditation, we simply sit. And what happens? We realize, just because I want to scratch my nose doesn't mean I have to. I have a choice not to do that. I want to check my social media, but that doesn't mean I have to. I have a choice not to do that. That's why Buddhist retreats are so strict, and there's a schedule and a dress code, and they take away our cell phone, and they take away our laptops, and we're not allowed to read, and we're not allowed to talk, because we're drunk and we're sobering up from all of that stuff. Just learning that, I can deal without that. I can break the cycle of reactivity, as you said, which is a great way to put it. And it's hard. Meditation is hard because we live in a society that tells us to do the opposite. If you want to do something, do it. If you want to say something, say it. So we have to break those habits. But like you said, if we keep doing it over and over, eventually it becomes easier. It just takes time. And we have to be willing to give ourselves that time. That's an important part of the practice too. Great insight, Allison. Thank you. Jay North said, I have been able to lessen my anger overall through meditation and by trying to follow the Eightfold Path. But how do you lessen anger when you feel yourself losing your temper in the moment? That's a good question. And I'm glad these practices have been working for you. For me, myself, mindful breathing has been really important. And mindful breathing, meditative breathing is not something I created. It's something that Buddhists and yogis have been doing for thousands of years. But it's very simple. You breathe in and out through the nose. You expand your stomach, push out the belly button on the inhale, and then relax on the exhale. And just focus on the physical sensation of the breathing deeply but comfortably. And what I've found, Jay North, is that as I do that, because our minds have trouble doing two things at once. I can be angry, or I can breathe and focus on my breathing, right? And that physical breath I just went through and the focusing on the breath, what it does is it takes attention, it takes fuel away from the anger. And it takes practice, right? So I remember when I first started training, sometimes it would be just all day doing this breath because I was a very angry person and I like to hold on to grudges. So just breathing all day, breathing. But doing that meditative breath gives us a little bit of space. I think it's a little bit more. This is why in the Nirvana Sutra, when Buddha is describing nirvana, he describes it as the extinguishing of a flame. The flame being represented by greed, anger, and ignorance. And the oil in the oil lamp, he uses oil lamp that's on fire, is our actions. And we have a choice. Do I put more oil in the oil lamp of my life to keep the flames of greed, anger, and ignorance going? Or do I take oil away to extinguish that flame? And it, like the 12-link chain of dependent origination, is a cycle. So we don't do it once. We do it over and over and over again over countless lifetimes. But that's what's worked for me, is that meditative breath. I also find that chanting helps. I don't know if you do chanting in your own practice, but I find chanting Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, is helpful to me as well. Because then instead of focusing on what I'm angry about, I'm focusing on Amida and his example and the Pure Land and the infinite light of wisdom and compassion. So I'm redirecting my thoughts, just like with meditation. I have my thoughts, I say hello, I come back to the breath. I have my thoughts, I say hello, I come back to the breath. Chanting, I have my thoughts, I say hello, I come back to the chant. Namo Amida Butsu. Over and over again, 10,000 times, until, like Allison said earlier, eventually it's just not so hard. But yeah, excellent question. And those would be my two suggestions, would be meditative breathing and then also chanting, if that's part of your practice as well. And it doesn't have to be Nembutsu, that's what I do, but I know in Nichiren Buddhism, they chant Namu Renge Kyo. That can also work. I take refuge in the Lotus Sutra, or I take refuge in the law of cause and effect, rather. Just find a chant you like. As long as your intention is good, whatever you're chanting will work. I'm ranting a little bit, but I'm thinking about my time in the Quantum School of Zen. Zen Master Sun Song used to say, it doesn't matter what you chant. You can chant Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. As long as your intention is pure, it'll help you. So find a chant, Jay North, that's helpful to you in your life, a recitation that's helpful to you in your life, if that's something you'd like to do, and just recite that in your anger so you can take fuel from that fire, oil from that lamp. Good question. I think that's something we all struggle with in our path, so I'm glad you asked that. Divad Buddha X said, usually when people act nasty towards me, I write a battle rap verse. Oh, okay. to express that negative energy in a positive way. That's lovely. That's lovely. I like that. I'm a Buddhist teacher, so I always go with, traditional Buddhist practices, but really it can be anything. Buddha is in everything and everyone. Any action that's in keeping with wisdom and compassion can transmute those feelings of greed, anger, and ignorance. So maybe it's not meditation. Maybe it's working out. Maybe it's writing a battle rap. Maybe it's gardening. Just find something that's healthy and life-affirming that you like to do. And when you have those emotions, when you have those feelings, go do that thing. I actually have a good friend who that's his thing. When he's had a bad day, if he's angry, if he's frustrated, he goes and works out. And he's in incredible shape because he has a job that's very stressful. But what it does is he goes to work, and he has all this stress, all this suffering. He goes to the gym and he works out. And then when he goes home to his family, he's calm, cool, and collected. He's breaking that cycle of suffering. His wife, his children, bad day, good day, doesn't matter. Dad's calm, cool, and collected by the time he gets home because he found an effective way to transmute that suffering instead of passing it on to others. So I think that's great, Divad. That's excellent. Battle rap. I like it. Anything that's healthy and life-affirming, use that so we break that cycle. Frank Ingiosi said, I'd be interested in your thoughts on situations where breaking the cycle of suffering perhaps creating a new cycle of suffering, either related to original or unanticipated. So that's a good question. That could be a talk in and of itself because the First Noble Truth tells us life is suffering. So the way I take that is it doesn't matter what we do, there will always be some level of suffering attached to it. That's just the nature of the Saha world we live in. For example, some people who are Buddhists, not all, but some people who are Buddhists don't eat meat. They are vegetarian or they're vegan because they don't want to cause unnecessary suffering to animals. And that's great. There are Buddhist teachings that encourage us to be plant-based, or other Buddhist teachings that say it's okay to eat meat. So you can find support either way. This isn't a should we eat meat discussion. But the thing is, even if we're plant-based, one of the things we have to come to terms with is there's still suffering in that food chain, right? Pesticides are dropped on the crops, and that kills insects. When we plow the earth and turn over the soil, there's bacteria and worms that are killed. I saw this firsthand when I worked on a farm, and I struggled with it. Right? I don't want to kill earthworms. I thought I'd be good if I just ate vegetables, but no, there's still this suffering because we have to kill earthworms to till the soil so we can plant the crops so I can have vegetables to eat. What to do? And to a certain extent, we have to practice acceptance that that we can do the best we can, but we can't end all suffering. Sometimes there will be unintended consequences. We do the right thing in the moment, but there's still suffering somewhere down the chain. We say something nice or kind to a person, but they take it the wrong way. And in those things, we just have to ask ourselves, am I doing the best I can in this moment? And if we are, we just have to practice acceptance that, I tried my best. There's nothing I can do. But I did everything I could do. I'm reminded of the story of Kanan, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And there's a story of her going down into hell to save all the suffering beings there in hell. And because she's a celestial being, because she has miracle powers, she's actually successful. She clears hell of all the sentient beings that are there, saves everyone in hell from suffering. And then she blinks her eye, and hell is filled once again with sentient beings who are suffering. She did her best. And this is a bodhisattva, a celestial being with miracle powers. She saved all the beings in hell from suffering. She blinks her eye, hell is filled again. But what's telling about the story isn't that hell was refilled, it's how she responded. She didn't beat herself up. She didn't fall into despair. She just went back into hell and she saved more beings from suffering. And it filled again. And she just continued the cycle. She kept trying over and over and over again. But now it's a cycle of breaking suffering instead of continuing it. And that's all we can do. We want to be perfect, but samsara doesn't allow us to do that. We do the best we can. If we have a conversation, where we buy our clothes, what we eat, there's always going to be suffering involved, regardless. And in those cases, it's reducing the suffering as much as we can and just accepting the suffering that comes after. Not because we want individuals to suffer, not because we want to suffer, just because, again, going back to the first noble truth, suffering is part of life. And as Buddhists, we remove all the unnecessary suffering that we can, but we also accept the suffering that is inevitable. That's a part of the practice. So I think that's a very good question. It's a very important question. And that's how I approach it, is I take the view of Kanam. I know there will be suffering no matter what I do, but I try to reduce it as much as I possibly can. And then I ask myself, did I do the best I could? And if I did, I practice acceptance. And if there was actually something I could have done differently, or maybe I could have worded that differently, well, then I just try to do better the next time. So it's kind of a long answer, Frank, but I hope it answers your question. And it was a good one. Again, something I think all of us suffer with as we walk this path. Allison Griffin says, I prefer when the dirt blows back on me immediately, so I learn faster. That's a very mature take, Allison. That's good. I think we do learn faster if we have the right mindset. If the dirt comes back, because then we're like, ooh, I should not have done this. But, sometimes it takes a while, and that's okay too. The important thing is we're always practicing right view, and we're also always working to get better. Whenever the dirt comes, however it comes, I will work with it. But yeah, wanting it to come faster so you can move along the path faster, that's cool. That's cool. It shows me you're not trying to avoid your suffering, which is great. You're just trying to work with it skillfully. Very cool. Divad Buddha X said, I think I know the answer, but what are your thoughts on psychedelic drugs and the weird experience that people go through when they're on them? Good Lord. So I have that reaction because it's just funny how these talks go sometimes, because I feel like there have been 4 questions tonight. It's like I could give a whole talk just on that subject. And maybe I will in the future. But so psychedelic drugs. I'm not a fan of psychedelic drugs. And I'll tell you why. Primarily, and look, there are spiritual traditions where psychedelic drugs are part of it. When I was working on the farm in Indiana, there was another person there, another apprentice. He was also helping me build this tiny house we were working on. And he was studying to be a shaman. And he had just come back from South America where he was studying with the shaman, and they were, using psychedelics as part of the practice. And he was talking about his experiences, and I was talking about my experiences. And there was some carryover there. There were some similarities. So I'm not saying there's no benefit to psychedelic drugs. I'm not saying that people are bad if they do them. Here's why I personally, however, am not a fan of them, is that one, while they are part of some spiritual traditions like shamanism, I've seen nothing in the sutras or the writings to say that they're part of the Buddhist path. Not saying they're bad. Buddha was very particular about the teachings he gave. And I haven't seen anywhere he instructed us to use psychedelic drugs to have mind experiences to move farther on the path. So for that reason, I'm not a fan of including them in Buddhist training. In terms of the weird experiences that people have, I believe that what ends up happening with people, and I have no doubt that people have experiences, and they are real experiences. But if we don't have the framework and the training leading up to those experiences, we don't know what to do with them. Remember, I said in the past that there are like 3 aspects to actualizing, to enlightenment, rather. There's enlightenment as a state of being. We are enlightened. There's the actualization of enlightenment as shown in the Noble Eightfold Path. We are Buddhas who are acting like Buddhas. And there's the experience of enlightenment. These are the enlightenment experiences, right? The monk floats off the cushion. We feel like we're one with the universe. We see into the beginningless past and the beginningless future. Time stands still, right? And if you read enough Buddhist stuff, you'll read all about those types of experiences. And I believe, and those are enlightenment experiences. And I believe people who use psychedelic drugs, some of them are also having enlightenment experiences. I just don't think those experiences are very important. If we look at the abuses that have happened in spiritual communities, these are individuals that I am positive had an experience. And maybe they were very skilled at helping other people have similar experiences through psychedelic drugs or through other practices. But because they did not have the spiritual training and framework leading up to that, because they hadn't done the meditation, because they hadn't learned the morality that comes from sutra study, because they hadn't done prostrations to, kill their envy and their pride so that they could become more humble. They had those enlightenment experiences and they didn't know what to do with it. And then they acted out as a result. And the enlightenment experiences, they're cool, they're interesting, but traditionally in Zen, what you'll find, my experience with my teachers at least, is you sit down in Dokusan, that's interviews you and your teacher, and you tell them, hey, this cool thing happened to me during meditation, and they said, oh, that's great. Go back and continue meditating. They encourage you to almost forget about it as quickly as possible. They don't want to talk about it. Because we get caught up in the enlightenment experiences and then we don't want to live our regular life. I don't want to be here in regular life. I don't want to go to work. I want to feel like I'm floating. I want to feel one with the ancestors, right? And I feel like what happens with psychedelic drugs is that we start chasing these experiences and not wanting to practice the path, right? It's like riding a car versus running a marathon. You can travel 26.2 miles in a car. You can run 26.2 miles. And in both situations, you will get to the exact same place. So if all you want to do is get somewhere, cool, ride in the car. Nothing wrong with cars. But the training and the discipline that goes into being a marathon runner, the diets, the workouts, building up to the run itself, the feeling of accomplishment that comes afterwards. You don't get that driving in a car. You get to the same place. Like I said, I spoke to my friend who did the training with the shaman, who was becoming a shaman, and part of his training was the use of psychedelic drugs. And our experiences were very similar. He talked about what he'd experienced through psychedelics. I talked about what I experienced through meditation. Very similar. So I'm not saying nothing happens to these people. What I'm saying, though, is the training and discipline that goes into Buddhism changes our body, changes our mind, changes our spirit, so we can actualize our Buddha nature in a way that psychedelic drugs simply don't. They get us to the same place. They get us 26.2 miles, but we never say that someone who drove that distance was the same as a marathon runner. Similarly, someone who uses psychedelic drugs is not the same as someone who's been sitting on the cushion for years and years. I'm not convinced that using psychedelic drugs to have experiences will help us to work with our anger, will help us to work with our greed, to help us work with our ignorance. We'll have a cool experience, but it won't help us actualize our enlightenment. We'll see it, but we won't know what to do with it. So that's my view on psychedelic drugs. Sorry, I didn't mean to go into rant mode there. But again, a very good question. Definitely a question that you see a lot in Buddhist circles. Some of you may disagree. That's perfectly okay. I'm not your father. You can do what you want, but that's perfect. That's personally how I approach the practice. Allison Griffin said, I worked on a golf course, and when mowing the fairways, there would be frogs and earthworms in the path. I would get off the mower and remove the critters. It really annoyed the boss. I quit eventually. That's so beautiful. I remember I was watching this film 7 years in Tibet. And this is when I wasn't even practicing Buddhism at this point. I was just kind of dabbling and reading about it. I happened to see this film on Netflix where Brad Pitt plays this person who, I forget where he was, but World War II kicked off. And he ended up in a Chinese prison camp. He escaped. He went to Tibet. And then he finds Buddhism. And he becomes a tutor for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he's teaching him about the West, because His Holiness is kind of an international figure. He needs to understand Western culture. And as part of this tutelage, he also got exposed to Buddhism. So one of the things they were doing is they were trying to build a monastery. And he's wondering, why is it taking so long? And it was because, much like what you just described, Allison, the monks were taking the worms out of the soil and moving them before they would dig in, because they didn't want to kill the earthworms. A beautiful practice. If you can treat earthworms and frogs in this case with that much dignity, that's going to help you treat human beings also with dignity. So it's wonderful. I mimicked that a little bit when I was on the farm in Indiana. What were we doing? Oh, we were getting clay and straw. We were using clay slip to build this tiny house, which is like a clay, water, straw concoction. The straw holds everything together, long story short. And what it does is it provides building material, and it's also good insulation when you build the house. So it gets warm as you light the fire, then it radiates that heat inward. So just random building techniques if you ever want to build an off-the-grid tiny house. But based on what I saw in that movie, I did a similar thing. As we're digging up the clay, so I grabbed the earthworms and moved them, and we dig some more. And thankfully, the person who was working with me, the same person actually who I was speaking with about shamanism, he was on board. Like, I don't think he got it, but we were both on a spiritual path. So he's like, okay, this is just some weird Buddhist thing, whatever. So he just kind of hung out and like watched airplanes and whatnot while I'm moving all of these earthworms and whatnot. But yeah, how we treat the natural world grows into how we treat human beings. We see the Buddha in earthworms, we see the Buddha in frogs, suddenly we see the Buddha in people. It all builds. So unfortunately, your boss was not as helpful as the person I was building the house with, but I'm sure the earthworms and the frogs appreciate that. So it's very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Loyalty say, how to control envy and non-motivation. And then you also said, envy is my worst trait. It can be very toxic. I agree. It can be very toxic. I, in my own practice, struggled with envy quite a bit. And it wasn't so much envy as it was fear that this other person has accomplished this thing and I haven't accomplished that, or maybe I'm envious because they're getting attention I want to get, and are they going to get the promotion over me type of deal. So how do we deal with envy? Well, the way the Buddha dealt with envy is he just took away all of the ways we could be envious of other people. Right? So he just had a very simple, minimalistic, monastic life of one bowl, 2 robes, alms rounds, only ate with donations. We don't need to be monastics. Buddhism is for lay people too. But I think that can be helpful when we go on Buddhist retreats and they're taking all of our stuff away and we eat the food they give us and we live by their schedule. Those retreats are helpful because they take away that fear I was just talking about. Because we realize, oh, you know what? Worst case scenario, I don't need all that stuff. If that other person gets the promotion, okay. I don't need it. I want it. It'd be cool, but I can live without it. And once we understand we can live without these things, it can be helpful. Part of our training, the meditation. We were talking about that cycle of reactivity. The meditating, the chanting, the sutra study, break that cycle. We want to be envious. That's reactivity. We want to scratch our nose. That's reactivity. But if we learn to not scratch our nose while we're meditating, we can learn to not give in to our envy. Not to say it doesn't come up, but we don't follow that path. We don't do that thing. So envy is a natural part of our experience, but it's not something we have to give into. And that just takes time, just takes training. I think another thing that was very helpful for me, and I actually learned this from Bhante Sudaso, who is the abbot of Buddhist Insights. When I was on retreat with him, he's the person who taught me the teaching of the universal Buddha body. And he worded it slightly differently in that, we've all lived countless lives. So we've already experienced everything we could possibly experience. I've been a man, I've been a woman, I've been a child, I've been an old person, I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been in between. So anything that other people have, at some point in my endless stream of existence, I've had that thing too. So what is there to be envious of? They have more money than I do? All right, well, in some other lifetime, I had more money than them. No big deal. It's just the cycle. They're more famous than I am. Well, in a previous life, I was like a prince or a princess or something like that. So I've experienced that already. I've had that thing. So I don't need to want after it now because I've experienced it already before. So that's very that's something that resonated with me. Another thing that can be helpful is reminding ourselves that we're all part of the same Buddha body, aspects of the same Buddha, the Dharmakaya. So anything that other people get or experience, I'm getting and experiencing it too. Maybe not directly, but we're all part of the same body, all right? If you eat food, every cell of your body experiences it, not just your stomach. So if someone else is a millionaire, I'm a millionaire. My bank account may not show $1 million, but we're part of the same body. Their money is my money. Maybe not in the conventional sense, but in the absolute sense. If someone else gets a new car, I get a new car. This is where the teaching of sympathetic joy comes from. One of the sublime states of Buddha that we're told that we should build within ourselves. One of the Brahma Viharas, sympathetic joy. If I understand that you and I are part of the same Buddha body, I can be joyful when you get something because then I know I get it too. I'm happy that you got a promotion because we got a promotion. My suffering is your suffering, but your joy is my joy. And that's something we have to nourish within ourselves. And it's not something that happens overnight because we live in a society that's very capitalistic, very individualistic, and it just divides us. So it's a requirement of the training that we learn to see ourselves in others. I'm Buddha, you're Buddha. Your joy is my joy. Nothing to be envious about because your win is my win. And that was also helpful for me in ending my feelings of envy. It's just remembering that all of our joy is connected. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. Great question. Another thing that everyone who walks this path struggles with, because again, we live in a society that encourages the opposite. So I hope that helped you. Frank Ingiosi said, thank you for your teachings and time tonight, Sensei. Thank you for joining, Frank. I'm glad this was helpful to you. I appreciate it. Diva Buddha X said, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Yes. Layman Pang nailed it when he said that. For those of you who don't know the story, Layman Pang was a lay person. He had a job. He was very wealthy. Eventually, he wanted to devote his life to Buddhist practice. So he took all his material possessions. He went out on a rowboat and he threw them in a lake because he didn't want other people to be burdened by his stuff. And then he went on the road with his daughter, with his wife, and they practiced Buddhism. And he was very deeply realized, recognized by many monastics by his training. Another reminder, we don't need to be monks to walk this path. Lay people can do it too. So one day he was challenged by another person who said, my teacher has miracle powers. He can stand on one side of the river, right, with a brush and do calligraphy on the other side. Calligraphy, like what you see on the scroll. And they said, what's your miracle power? And Layman Pang just said, my miracle power is simple. When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tired, I rest. I carry water and chop wood. And that's the whole of the practice. That's one of the core teachings of Zen. So thank you, Divad, for bringing that up. That's such a powerful training. Just chop wood, carry water. That's why Buddhism in everyday life, that's the point of Dharma Sunday, is that we don't, as much as I tell you guys to study the sutras, because I think they're so important, studying everyday life, chopping wood, carrying water, that's enlightenment. That's the actualization of enlightenment. That's spiritual practice. If we're willing to do that, everything else falls into place. Alison Gerfin said, Namo Abhida Butsu, and did the, I believe that's a mala. I've never seen that one before, but the mala emoji. Thank you, Alison. Namo Abhida Butsu. Loyalty said, I see, thank you, Sensei. I will research the universal Buddha body further. That resonated with me deeply. Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you like that. Look up universal Buddha body, universal Buddha. Also, if you look up Trikaya, Trikaya teaching, some good stuff will come up with that. Also, Dharmakaya. So the Trikaya is the three bodies of Buddha. So you'll learn that. And the Dharmakaya is the universal Buddha body. That's the Sanskrit for it. Dharmakaya. Look that up, study that. That will help you too. Wonderful. So, anything else before we end this evening? Any other comments, questions, concerns? Oh, wow. These chats, I will never run out of things to talk about during these Dharma Sunday talks, because you guys always give such good questions. Now I'm like taking notes in my head. It's like, oh, I need to cover that. Oh, I need to cover that. But I don't want this to be 6 hours long. So I just try to give the short version, but remember that I want to cover that more later on. So wonderful. Thanks so much. You're a huge help. Loyalty did the bow emoji. Thank you, Loyalty. I appreciate that. All right. Anything else? Going once, going twice? All right. Well, I hope you guys can join me next Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern is when we do the live stream. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when it starts. Every now and then it starts a few minutes late if there are technical issues, but I try to get started right at 6:30. And we also, if you want to go deeper, we do the meditation and sutra study that happens every Wednesday, 6:30 p.m., also live streamed here. Thank you so much. Amitabha.